Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Insidious the Red Door. Now this is going to be a movie that's essentially the capping of the trilogy of the Insidious films, because if you've seen the first two films and if you're a fan of the Insidious franchise, you know that those two films focus on Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne's characters, with Lynn Shay kind of being the co-lead to those films, but the third and the fourth Insidious movies kind of focused on Lynn Shay herself and focused on that character, and they were kind of prequels, but now we're finally getting back to that original family that started it all, and we're going to see what this family has been up to all these years later in a kind of legacy sequel type of way, you know. And we get a lot of legacy sequels these days. We just got Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny that also kind of falls into some sort of, you know, tropes of the subgenre that is legacy sequels at this point. And I was very nervous for this thing, especially it being the directorial debut from Patrick Wilson. And so I'm actually kind of shocked to say that I really, really like this movie, and I haven't seen the critical reception for this movie yet as well, because the embargo has not been lifted for reviews, so I don't know how this movie's going to land with most critics, but I think my mixture of my low expectations and my, you know, sincere fandom of the Insidious franchise, I was really surprised about how much I liked this film. But of course, this will be a spoiler review for Insidious the Red Door, so if you have not seen this film just yet and you're a fan of the Insidious franchise, I highly recommend you guys go check this one out in theaters. And if you just love horror movies, this is a really fun sort of like haunted house kind of ride. This is what these movies are. They're not really the top tier horror movies of all time. They're not like the Hereditaries of the world or stuff that's more elevated when it comes to elevated horror. This is just a really fun time at the theater, and I think you guys will have a blast watching. So let's get into the spoilers for Insidious the Red Door. So like I said, this movie is treated in a similar way as some legacy sequels have been, which you take a happy-ish ending that the Insidious Chapter 2 had, and you kind of destroy all the relationships. You make them all in a more grumpy state. The marriage between Rose Byrne and Patrick Wilson has broken up. You have the death of Patrick Wilson's mother. That's kind of the inciting incident of this film. That's the thing that kind of sparks this family to, you know, come together at a point where they haven't been together in quite some time, because you pulled these characters apart off screen, and now you're going to have to write some excuse for these characters to come back together by the ending of the film. And I think that's the thrill of this film. I think that is a trope where you take these characters that had happy endings and you make them go through some hardships off screen, and you deal with these characters after a certain amount of years and to see how they react to the hardships that they have faced in that time. I think it's a trope for a reason. I think when it does work, it really works. And I think the screenwriter of this film, who has had some up and downs in his career so far, really did find a good balance of, you know, doing these great character moments while also having a fun time with the Insidious horror type of, you know, fun haunted house vibes that you get out of this franchise. And I think with a movie like Insidious Chapter 2 ending on a note where all their memories are suppressed in that film, and so they don't remember the events of that entire year that they essentially had, all the hardships. They only remember that, you know, the kid was in a coma for a little while and he woke up, and that's pretty much all they remember. But the suppressed memories, especially when it comes to Patrick Wilson's character, has made his mind very foggy. He doesn't really understand what's going on with him. His marriage with Rose Byrne has kind of hit a tough point in their relationship because she is constantly lying to him. She doesn't know how to deal with these things because he's off, and she knows why he's off, but she can't tell him why, because it's such a ridiculous and outlandish thing, and it's extremely hard because you don't want that to happen again. And so it just puts so much strain on their relationship that it feels like a natural way to break them up in between films. And so honestly, I think the starting point of this movie really did set up these characters in an interesting way. When you have certain Insidious movies, they always start off with like a scare sequence or something really, you know, interesting when it comes to that. But this movie starts off with a slowly zooming in shot on Patrick Wilson as he's, you know, forgetting everything, and then you cut to the funeral, and it's pretty much the entire first 25 minutes of the film doesn't have any scares in it. It's all character based, and that is what I was truly surprised about with this movie, because again, when you get a sequel to a horror movie, usually you just jump straight into it, and usually you kind of throw characters off to the side just to get to the scares. But this movie decided to take his time with the characters, and I really did appreciate it. Ty Simpkins is also back as Dalton in this movie, and you know, how lucky are they that they cast a kid actor in that first Insidious movie who was really great in those two films. When it comes to child performances in horror movies specifically, I think that Ty Simpkins was really good in that. He's great in Iron Man 3, and it's great that when he is now an adult, adult, he's now grown up, and he's still playing this role. He was really good in this movie. And, you know, when you have situations like Glass, where you have the kid from Unbreakable, and he grows up, and he's not that great of an actor after all these years. You know, he was known for that one role, and he was, you know, down to make that movie, which is great on him that he came back for Glass. It didn't really feel like he was a trained actor at that point. But when it comes to Ty Simpkins, you don't deal with that issue. He is honestly really, really good in this movie. And again, I was surprised by so many aspects of this film, and he was another part of that surprise. I loved all the sequences that dealt with him and his new friend that he met in college named Chris, the person that he kind of was accidentally dormed with at the beginning of this film. And, you know, her character was a very odd one. And I think that the Insidious movies always have some weird, goofy characters in them that kind of lighten the mood, that make it feel like a fun amusement park type of thing in a good way. And I think she really brought that vibe to the movie, because you don't have Specs and Tucker in this film to kind of bring that forward. And, you know, when it comes to Specs and Tucker, they could always get on your nerves. And I can see this character getting on some people's nerves in this movie, but for me, I think she really did work, because she was really the only force in this movie that's kind of lightening the mood. And when it comes to all the focus on this, you know, this dynamic with this friendship that's blossoming between these two characters as it progresses throughout the entire movie, you know, some of the adventures that they go on their own when it comes to like the frat party and stuff like that isn't always the most engaging thing, but I think their relationship and their chemistry together as performers was really solid to make me always engaged watching them on screen together. But let's get into the actual scare sequences in this movie, because it is a horror movie and it is an Insidious movie, and I think the Insidious movies are really known for being jump scare movies, but in a good way. You know, you can have so many things in this film that you can say is inherently bad because of the perception of those things. Like the Insidious franchise is known for jump scares, and jump scares are known for being very cheap at times, but I think James Wan, especially in those first two films, had a great handle on suspense and building up to those jump scares and having them always be effective and never being cheap or never being fake out jump scares. And I think this movie also follows suit and does the same thing. And with Patrick Wilson actually being the director of this film, I'm also very impressed by his directorial debut here, because he does handle the horror sequences really well. I know he loves horror because, you know, he's acted in so many horror films throughout his entire career, but I didn't know he had a passion for this genre enough to actually make a sequel to the Insidious franchise that is so great with the horror sequences. The first jump scare is Ty Simpkins, you know, he's in the art class, his teacher is telling him to kind of look back in his thoughts to kind of pull this art out of his subconscious, and he's painting this thing on his canvas, or he's drawing it with the chalk, and it turns into this door shape, and he's just really scratching at it, and you're kind of hypnotized by the moment because he himself is hypnotized. And I think that the direction and the editing and the score and all the, you know, everything that went into this sequence was really good. It really engaged you into the screen. I was leaning forward, and then all of a sudden the thing happens and it cuts, and you have the loud jump scare, and he sees into the further, and it's the first kind of instance where he's back in that world, and it really got me. Honestly, I think that's the best jump scare I've seen in quite some time. But overall, I thought Patrick Wilson did a great job reintroducing the world of The Further to us, the audience, and to the characters of this movie, because like I said, they forgot how everything worked, and so you have to reintroduce all these things to the characters themselves. And I loved all the sequences of Ty Simpkins, you know, kind of exploring his abilities and trying to figure out exactly what's going on, and always seeing something slowly reaching up to him, slowly getting closer and closer and closer. And I thought that tension always built really well to a great jump scare, and so I thought all that stuff was great. My only, you know, criticism that I would have for this, which I think is a fairly decent one, is the fact that it was pretty much the entire first and second act, which was, you know, rediscovering this world, where us as an audience, we already know how all this stuff works. So I guess some of it felt a little bit redundant, because, you know, the characters just need to learn it, but I feel like they could have learned it a little bit faster so we can get into the world of The Further and get into the guy with the red face, you know, that demon that was in that first film. I wish we could get to him a little bit faster instead of the beginning of the third act, because, you know, the second Insidious movie really dove into The Further in general, and especially the last key, you're pretty much in The Further the entire movie, and so there's a lot of moments where you kind of wish you could just get into it a little bit faster and have a little bit less sequences of them trying to figure out what's going on and figuring out, you know, catching up to us as the audience a little bit faster, because I think that second act was a little bit meandering. And honestly, the biggest bummer in this movie for me was the fact that because you're going through this route of this legacy sequel type thing in the story that they chose, you broke up this family, and therefore you don't really get to see Rose Byrne that much in this movie at all. And I thought that was a really big loss, because of course that first movie, she's really the focus of the film for that entire first half of the movie, and Patrick Wilson is always kind of the support for her. And so now you kind of flip the script here, here. Now the focus is on Patrick Wilson. You get to learn some of his backstory. You get some fun sequences of him trying to mess with his memory and seeing the ghost of his father behind the glass. And you have fun sequences with him getting haunted instead of having Rose Byrne be haunted this time around. But also Rose Byrne is such a great actress, and because they weren't together, romantically in this movie and they were split up, she's not also there with him experiencing these things. And I wish they were together more, because whenever they're on screen together, I think they're really fun. And in the third act, when they do finally kind of reconcile and they talk, they figure out what's going on, and Rose Byrne, she tells her side of the story, she tells the truth of what or why she did the things that she did, and I love all that stuff. I thought that was all great character stuff. I just wish that we could have seen a little bit more of her, because she is so great in these films. But to get back to the things that I really did enjoy about this movie was the fact that it didn't fall into all the tropes of legacy sequels. Yes, they do have, the general storyline that you see a lot in legacy sequels, and they also have the cameos that you normally see in legacy sequels. I just thought it felt very natural, all the references that they had to those first two films. When you see Tucker and you see Specs in this movie, it felt like a natural way for them to kind of look up, try to figure out what's going on. You got to see the cameo of them on the computer, and you also get to see a cameo of ELISE on the computer, as well as along with her being at the very end of the film talking to Patrick Wilson. And so the cameos were all great. They felt natural. They felt like they were all in spots in the movie that felt like, the characters would interact with those people in this movie. But besides that, you have the famous, Tiptoe Through the Tulips song that they easily could have played the first time that Dalton was back in that room. He sees the red kind of loft above him and he's tied up, and they easily could have played that song there, but they played a different song instead, and eventually it kind of warps and turns into that song. And I thought that was a really great way to tie in these things, to kind of reintroduce him into the horrors of what his childhood was. And again, there's all these different decisions that they make in this movie that could have gone the cliched route. They could have gone the cheap route of nostalgia for the people that really do love that first film, but they have a story and they have a character arc for these people, where you have Patrick Wilson learning his backstory and learning how to embrace his abilities, and you have Dalton's character who's learning how to, accept also his abilities. He's trying to learn exactly what happened to him in his childhood, and he's trying to reconcile with his father. And this father and son storyline that they have in this movie, I think, is so strong that it warrants this film's existence, and everything else is just icing on the cake. And so I think this is a really solid way to do a legacy sort of sequel to the Insidious franchise. Again, I do wish we got a little bit more in the further with the red-faced demon. He wasn't in it much. He was just kind of popping in and out there to cause some scares. And so I guess in some ways that is a little bit underwhelming, but I thought the character stuff was so much better than I was expecting for this movie, because I wasn't expecting there to be any character development whatsoever. I wasn't expecting to care about these people as much as I cared about them in those first two films. And with the ending of this film, yes, you broke up the characters and you kind of squandered the ending of that second movie just to, tear them apart, just to bring them back together again. But when they came back together again by the ending of the film, it felt like a Stranger Things type of thing, where they're finally back together and they're working together to solve this problem. Once they finally get out, it feels cathartic. You have that sigh of relief, and you have a happy ending with these characters that feels hopeful, that feels like they don't have to lie to each other. They don't have to hide the past, and they can embrace the past. And I love the idea of him painting over that door to seal it all in, while also remembering exactly what happened and having that knowledge to make sure that it never happens again. I think that is a more solid ending than that second film had. So you can definitely count me as somebody who is genuinely surprised at how much I enjoyed this movie, and I hope that you guys also enjoyed the film too. Again, I haven't seen the critical reception of this film, but what's more important than the critical reception is the reception from the fans of the franchise itself. And as a fan of Insidious, I think this caps off a really solid trilogy with Insidious, Insidious Chapter 2, and Insidious The Red Door. I think they all work together really, really well, and we have another great horror trilogy on our hands. And Patrick Wilson is also another great horror filmmaker that is, just beginning his career, and I'm very curious to see if he does something original next. His next project, whatever he does, I'm going to be right there on opening night, because I love Patrick Wilson. He was great in this movie, and he did a solid job directing. So now I pass the question off to you guys. Definitely comment down below all the good and the bad things that you thought of Insidious The Red Door. I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts. Am I crazy for really enjoying this movie, or did I just set my expectations absurdly low, and that's the only reason why I enjoyed this movie? Honestly, it could be either one. So definitely comment down below all those things. And also, if you enjoyed this review, leave a like, and also subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I just reviewed Indiana Jones last weekend, and I'm definitely excited to review Mission Impossible and Barbie and Oppenheimer in the next couple of weeks, so definitely stay tuned on the channel for all of those. So thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.